And here we are on the first Swytch Gaming podcast. Welcome. I know you don't know what this is. With me to help explain is Perry.
Hi there.
Yep, that's Perry waving and saying hi there.
That explained everything.
And our first guest, our honored first guest, the founder of Swytch Gaming and Swytch Comics, Marco. How you doing, Marco?
I'm doing fine. I am here. I arrived on time, I guess. So yeah, we're doing great.
As you can see, Marco is quite the comic fan, and he's quite the video game fan as well.
To a lesser degree, I think I've never considered myself much of a video game like fanatic or anything. I just do play them, I guess.
That tracks. This week's topic is comic book video games.
Woo!
Yay.
Yeah.
Look at you fucking pausing like Johnny Carson waiting for Ed McMahon to react.
An issue we ran into while prepping this, there's very little delineation between comic book games and superhero games. So this is the first question I had for Marco. Are all comic book games superhero games and vice versa?
I mean, to a certain degree. I mean, you definitely have certain ones that and they take a specific movie and make a video game of that specific movie. Yeah, I'd say that's probably where you're furthest from it. But like with the newer like Spider-Man games that have come out, the inspiration from those are going to be more so your stories from comics. They might take inspiration from things that happen in live media as well, or animated shows, I guess, too. But it's it all flows around and becomes one.
So people who aren't familiar with comics, what we're mainly going to be talking about today is Marvel and DC, the two superpowers or whatever. Stan Lee, inventor of such great characters as Wall Man, and DC with such characters as I'll find one in post.
Batman, right?
I was gonna think of a bad character, but okay. So I'm glad you mentioned the Spider-Man game. Insomniac Games released Marvel's Spider-Man in 2018, and it was widely seen as a success, a commercial success, a critical success, and gamers who are famously picky couldn't seem to find much to pick at.
God, how long did it take you to write that line?
Marco, you played that game.
No.
You didn't?
No.
Okay.
No, I think you're the only one here.
I said, I'm not a huge gamer. I appreciate what they did, and there's cool things that I enjoy about the game. But I find myself really just being more of an observer. I play very little games these days.
As someone who's into comics, though, do you find that's the reason why it's harder for you to get into some of it? Like I've noticed if I read a book or something or watch a movie and then play a game based off that, it's harder for me to like involve myself with it because I'm biased coming into it.
Not necessarily. It's not like there can be certain things where it's like, oh my god, they screwed up that character. I'm trying to think like the Avengers game when they did their first like trailer showing off Taskmaster, which is a character I really enjoy. Which his whole thing is copying moves. Actually, they did Taskmaster really well in the Spider-Man game, but it just wasn't like he was just flying around in the jetpack. You'd hit him a bunch, and then he'd fly back and throw a bomb at you or something. And it's like, that's not at all what he does. And so
Right.
it's irritating in that regard. But like, even when, something cool pops up like Spider-Man, it's just, I'm like, oh, that's neat. I'm probably not going to get around to it though.
Yeah, Marco's talking about Marvel's Avengers, which came out in 2020, and that was the opposite side of the spectrum. People fucking hated that game.
I was kind of excited for it at first, but when I saw the first gameplay trailer, and when that's another thing that like takes you out of it is like when you don't have differentiate between if you're playing between the Hulk or Iron Man or Black Widow, and you're basically doing the same thing. It's like that's like just either stick you in one role or make each role feel significant. But I mean, I think that's just a game design thing anyway.
Yeah, and going back to comic games, there have been both a lot and not enough, which is interesting, and that's something that I looked into. It ties into movie games.
Yeah.
Games that are released like blank blank the video game almost always fail, and they don't even really make those anymore because they
No.
always failed.
Yeah, I think we got a whole like deluge of those at a certain point, and they were just universally panned, and eventually they gave up. Because for a while we were getting a fucking game that came out with almost every single movie, Like
Yeah.
that era when they were even giving you fucking video games at like Burger King and
Yeah.
stuff when you got a Happy Meal.
Yeah.
So everyone's trying to jump on the trend of video games at a certain point. And thankfully, I think we've seen a regression from that model.
So what I want to do is just look at why are comic book games, superhero games, so often so terrible. It seems that with any other genre of game, you have a better success percentage rate. I looked at lists, and oh boy, like the Iron Man video game, the old Hulk one.
Both terrible.
Yeah, can you guys think of any other just really bad comic games?
I think the Spider, like from like the Sam Raimi movie Spider-Man video games, I think some of those like hold some nostalgia for a lot of people, but aren't necessarily good.
I talked to Perry yesterday and asked him, we were trying to figure out, our favorite comic book game. And I think we both said Spider-Man 2 for the PS2.
But he's probably right, though, where like some degree of it is just because we were kids playing it at the time. Like, I'm sure if I went back to it now, it probably doesn't hold up nearly as well as I'm remembering.
And games have gotten better. Consoles have gotten better.
Yeah.
And therefore our expectations have gone up. We have an upcoming episode about the history of consoles. And what would cost $60 for an Atari 2600, you wouldn't get anyone to pay $60 for that now.
No, it'd be a Flash game.
And I think it's pretty similar. There's a lot of Hulk Flash games, but not a lot of Hulk, current gen console games. So we wanted to look into that and understand sort of why, the budgetary reasons and the consumer reasons. So I actually found a really good Reddit article and I sent it to Perry.
Yes, I do have it.
Read us the entire article.
Why are superhero video games so hard to make? Well, superheroes seem made perfectly for video games. Why is it so hard to make a good superhero game? They use the word superhero too much for my liking.
I would agree.
And then somebody chimes in and responds,
You actually have to dumb down the awesomeness factor. Oh, I hate this fucking guy already. The awesomeness factor of most superheroes to make their abilities fit on a controller with only 12 buttons. Oculus Rift should change all that. Yeah, that panned out. This comment's from 8 years ago, by the way.
Yeah, I don't agree with
Fucking
that at all.
Nostradamuses
okay, that was
making
great.
terrible predictions. The Oculus Rift is going to take over the gaming industry. Just you wait. Historically, the games have been mere cash grabs to capitalize on popular franchises. People aren't going to buy it because it's good. They're going to buy it because it has Superman in it, as seen by the classic Superman 64.
People have now seen the failure of all those games and won't immediately shell out money for the next big title.
How many of these games do you think might just be like reskins of shelved games where they developed an original IP that didn't pan out, but then a superhero game came along and they just kind of like, hey, that guy's now Iron Man, so here's a game based around it?
That is a possibility. You could have a developer who builds a game for years and years. They're never able to sell it. And then one day Marvel approaches them and says, hey, if you make him Batman,
Right.
and we'll give you all this money and you don't have to do any work and we'll take it over.
Marvel making it Batman. Is that what you just said?
That'd be
Yes.
a hell of a trick.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting maneuver.
This is why we have you on.
It used to be with every movie there'd be a video game, and I have fond memories of the Star Wars Episode 3 video game, which was so funny because it had nothing to do with the movie at all. They were clearly given a few video clips and like rough story beats and said, make a video game around this. And all kinds of characters and droids and stuff that do not exist in the movie. But yeah, obviously at some point, and I don't know when, but at some point that definitely stopped happening. And then so was it kind of just like viewed as like taboo in the gaming market as like comic games don't make money, even though they had the wrong approach to it?
The person continues to say, you've probably noticed that for the past 5 to 10 years, the X movie, the game trend has largely disappeared. This is because nowadays it costs so much to make games that the revenue from children's not really worth it.
Gotcha. So like we wouldn't at our age buy Spider-Man 2, the video game, but kids probably still would.
Well, and parents now have much more options. Parents see something like Insomniac's Spider-Man game and would rather go with, hey, let's buy this game that we know is good that is also based on Spider-Man, rather than just instantly pre-ordering, Wolverine 3, the movie, the game.
I think the digital marketplace probably has something to do with it too, because before, like when you had to go to the store to buy a game, chances are parents might just go and see a fucking superhero on the box and be like, hey, that one for my kid. But now you can sit on your couch and browse through literally thousands of games before you have to make a decision on where you're going to put your money.
Could it also be that people, none of us, but people our age now have children, and
Yeah.
and people our age know about video games, and they're like, no, that's a crap game, but I'll get you this one.
Right. It's a more educated consumer base.
Yeah, it must be annoying to the developers who can't trick the consumers as easily anymore. With YouTube, you can now immediately look up reviews of games that aren't even out yet. They would rather just watch the cutscenes of something on YouTube than pay to play a game that doesn't really have substance to it.
And honestly, I'm guilty of that too. Like, I don't really play many video games, but I've definitely, like, if a game gets big enough, I'll go watch a decent chunk of gameplay online just to kind of see what the story's like.
Yeah, I did that with the last Mortal Kombat game. I watched my brother play it, and I love the story. Like, it was super fun. I didn't play the game.
YouTube has really changed everything in that regard, because if you look back to video games in the early 2000s, from the beginning to the 2000s, they would each have like a 90-second to 2-minute trailer, but it was never actual gameplay. So if it was a shitty RTS, you wouldn't know that until you bought it and clicked play. It would be these awesome heroes swinging swords, or Batman, for example, and then you go in and it's just a point and click adventure game. It's harder to hide that now from consumers. You're expected to have a gameplay reveal. It's not just teaser trailers. Someone here says in the same Reddit thread, most superhero games are tied in with a movie and thus have to fit in with what the story of that movie follows. A movie's plot only allows for so much variation, so many games made for movies are limited as to what they can change.
Like, part of that statement is true. I would say it needs to follow the plot, but they're also not told the plot. Because it needs to come out around the same time, and either things change, or B, like everything's secretive and you're not allowed to know. And
especially with Marvel.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, Marvel and Star Wars for sure. I'd say Star Wars is worse.
And I think the average video game playing consumer doesn't realize that the people who made the movie are not the same people working on the game in any capacity. The people who worked on Insomniac's Spider-Man, I mean, sure, some of them probably were Spider-Man fans, but that's about as close as it gets. That's not really how the industry works.
As far as like the creative team, I'm sure that had a lot more focus on people that did really want to tell that story.
But that was an interesting one because it wasn't based on a movie. It wasn't directly based on a movie. And I think that's what we're leaning towards now, is to overcome that. Yeah, not being able to share the story, not being able to change the story to fit a game. There was a Deadpool game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was okay. It got okay reviews. It was wild and wacky, but could have been better. Just one of those things. It's like, it's fine.
The consensus on Reddit seems to be that things are getting better.
Things are looking bright, I'd say.
Is fewer games but better games a step in the right direction, do you think, Marco?
See, I'm the type of nerd that, there's a lot of people that are like, there's an oversaturation of things. This is my zone. I'll watch whatever show, movie pops up whenever, like, I'm down for it all the time. And if they keep making more games, I'm cool with that. I never think that type of thing necessarily. It's not always a quantity over quality or vice versa type thing, because I don't think there's a lot of companies in the gaming industry that are putting that big of an effort. Really, I mean, what we have that's looking good so far is like that Spider-Man. They've done 2 now that have been really good, and then they got Wolverine coming up, which people are very excited for. But there's not a ton of competition in that field, and I think there's a lot of room for more people to get into it.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things, almost like sports video games, where someone like EA can run the market because the purchasing rights for the property itself are so prohibitively expensive. Like, not everyone can afford to license NFL players. So the company that can shell out several $billion gets a monopoly on it. And it's probably the same thing with big properties, like Star Wars or Marvel movies at this point, where it's a self-selecting group because so few people actually have the ability to acquire the characters.
Yeah, you see now that only big name developers are getting the deals. if you go back to old demo disc games and the PS2 era, you'll see a lot of companies that are now bankrupt because the movie studios at that point maybe didn't know as well, and so they would just give out these contracts to whoever they could. The games would fail and they just write it off and then go on to their next movie. Now I think they're realizing that consumers might be smarter than that. Consumers might expect more, and that means that you need to have a team working on the game that is, for lack of a better word, good.
When you mentioned Star Wars, I forgot another good Star Wars game that's doing well is Fallen Order, and the sequel that I cannot remember.
There's a sequel now?
It's coming out. It's not out
Oh,
yet,
I
but
can't
people are
wait.
very excited. The strength of that again was going down to having a good story and solid gameplay.
So I'll change the topic here for a second because I'm looking at all the comics on your walls behind you, and I think there's been video games for most of them. You know comics more than me and Perry ever will. You have an audience now. Give the developers your suggestion for a comic book that has not had a video game yet.
Has there been a Daredevil game? I feel like that could be cool.
Well, you'd be fucking blind, so that wouldn't be the greatest gameplay.
It'd be a third-person game, obviously, but
just a guy running around like a Roomba, fucking bumping into balls and shit.
I do have a want. It's one that has been done before, but it's been a long time, and I think it could seriously use a big upgrade. Would be like a bounty hunter game, Star Wars Bounty Hunter, which they did some stuff with like Jango Fett on the N64 or something, I think. But I think it's time to go back to, because like people like that stuff, but like I don't want to go back and play that. I want to play like a new version. I think would be super cool.
There was a Daredevil video game in 2000,
really?
in 2003 for the Game Boy Advance.
Oh, that's probably around when that first movie came out or something.
Tie-in to the live-action film of the same name, which would have been the Ben Affleck one, right?
We don't count that.
So that's the exact trend we were talking about earlier. A game we were all alive for, none of us were aware of, because it was probably just rushed out to try and capitalize on the movie coming out.
Publisher, THQ, bankrupt. Other publisher, Encore Software, bankrupt.
Nobody cared about that movie either, though. So I mean that.
No.
So Insomniac's Spider-Man, all accounts, is the best-selling comic book / superhero game of all time. It just blew everything else out of the water.
The first one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Miles Morales also sold pretty well. They made a large amount of money.
An amount to be named.
It's our first episode,
shortly.
people.
More money than we'll ever see combined.
The Marvel Spider-Man series, it sold over 33 million copies worldwide.
It's a lot.
So that is the only clear success story that I've seen in the past 5-6 years in terms of comic book games.
Well, like I said, if you want to mention, Star Wars is a weird medium because it started as a movie, and then there's a lot of comics and novels and whatnot that came afterwards. So it's heavily tied into the comic world while not originating from comics. But there was Fallen Order, and like I said, a much anticipated sequel.
Or even going back to like KOTOR, Star Wars is really the only property that's been consistently, like, it's had some very successful games come out of it. Even Lego Star Wars, people love that. But
that is true.
LucasArts and Lucasfilm, when they did exist, they made Star Wars games. That's what they hired people to do. And that's why things like KOTOR and all that were well received at the time and still regarded as some of the best. Although I tried to go back and play KOTOR the other day on Steam. It didn't last very long.
It was free on my Kindle for a while.
Yeah.
Don't play games on the Kindle. It's unusable.
So we'll start wrapping up. Marco, what's your hope for the future of comic book titles, comic book video games?
Well, I mean, like I said, hopefully, more people see the success, and that's ultimately what capitalism's all about: seeing the success of someone else and stealing the idea and making it your own. And that's what makes this country beautiful. I think when people see, Spider-Man's doing well and Wolverine comes out, hopefully that does well, and then hopefully some other companies can fork up the money to get the rights to make some good games. And like whatever that Reddit article said, like it is a perfect playground just to have these characters. And I think there's the possibility to make so many good superhero games.
I have a feeling that Marvel has had way more success than DC has at video games, but we should mention the Batman Arkham Asylum series.
I'm not a big DC guy, as you can tell. There's not a single DC book on my wall. Yeah, I'd say they have a decent amount of credible games.
And also, and we may cover this on another episode, Lego seems to have bought the rights to every comic book franchise and every movie franchise. Indiana Jones, Batman, Star Wars. It just makes me wonder if those film companies already have a deal in place with Lego.
Yeah, I wouldn't know the logistics of, because then you're dealing with two different companies. But I would assume that Lego, there must be somebody at Lego, because like their movies are really well done too.
Oh, they're fantastic. Yeah.
So they must have somebody that is very protective of its rights and like making sure that it's used well. Because like we said, Star Wars has a lot of good games, but they also have a lot of bad games. It's not, whereas Lego, I feel like pretty universally is pretty solid.
Even if you make something out of plastic toy blocks in a video game, if it's a good IP and a good story, it'll still sell. It'll still intrigue gamers. All right, we're running out of time here. So, Marco, I mentioned at the beginning that you founded this channel, Swytch Gaming.
I did.
But also, you run Swytch Comics. You're currently beating us with X number of subscribers.
I'm at 1056, I think.
Tell us what you got coming up on your channel.
I just always, making more comic related videos. I've just did my first short film, which was a Moon Knight and Werewolf by Night little film that we put together. Had a lot of fun.
And where can people find you on social media?
Swytch Comics on Instagram and YouTube is mainly where I hang out.
Well, I myself am hopeful. I think that the gamer community has spoken and said, hey, we want good games. We're not going to buy any bad games anymore, THQ.
Is the gamer community what was that statement?
It's a bunch of people running around with fistfuls of money.
Yes.
Can't put that on YouTube.
You can. They'll demonetize it.
You think it's being monetized?
No, there you go.
All right, well, we are out of time. Perry, Marco, thank you so much for joining me on this experimental venture here on Swytch Gaming. Perry, we've got some new videos coming out soon.
Boy, do we. No, I'm asking, do we?
Yes, we do. All right, well, I guess I'll start the drums. Marco, thank you so much for being here. Perry, as always,
been a pleasure.
We will see you next month, where our topic will be the history of video game consoles.
History class.
Here from Swytch Gaming, it's Cody, it's...
And Perry.
And...
Perry.
Yeah!
Was I supposed to say my name?
We'll see you next time. Go subscribe to Swytch Comics. Good night, everybody.